Now, farmers formed a Go Slow convoy in Canterbury yesterday, protesting against the effect cheaper food imports are having on British farmers. The spectacle was organised by Fairness for Farmers, which saw more than 200 tractors block the ring road, causing gridlock across the city. Well, Jordan Lee, who's the Nature Programme Manager at the Conservative Environment Network, joins me in the studio now. Thank you for your company. Always a pleasure, Jordan. So people will be watching these pictures on screen and thinking, are we seeing the beginnings of a movement, a collective gathering steam here? We saw this before in Dover. We saw it last week in Wales. Now in Canterbury, as well as Fairness for Farmers. There's a farmer network up in Cumbria. Could this gather steam?
Well, undoubtedly, these have been a really difficult few years for farmers, whether it's the effects of Brexit, the war in Ukraine and COVID, all of which pushed up the cost of fuel and fertilisers for farmers. In Wales and across the EU now as well, we're seeing the effects of inflexible top-down targets being imposed on farmers. We want to see things done differently. That's what this is, the Conservative Environment Network's plan to put farming back on track. We want to see farmers rewarded for their work to positively improve the environment around them, not penalised as we've seen in Wales and across the EU. We also want to see a fairer deal given to farmers from the supermarkets. So that means toughening up the regulator and cracking down on the imports of goods which contribute to deforestation, for example, as well.
And yet, instead, Jordan, what we're seeing is a 10% reduction of livestock. That's what's being proposed because of environmental targets. 11% loss of labours. And that's on top of what we saw in Wales, a 20% loss of land, 10% to trees, 10% to wilding. Anyone can work out that's a 20% cut in your bottom line straight away, on top of net zero targets, on top of diesel taxes, on top of suppressed margins by the big retailers. It's a terrible time to be a farmer. Why aren't the government listening?
Well, the situation you've described is as it is in Labour-run Wales and across the EU, where we have seen these top-down targets introduced. In England, I do think the government have taken a different approach. That is to reward farmers for the positive contributions they take to improving the natural environment, so-called environmental land management schemes. I think that's the right approach. Obviously, we need to go much further. This means ensuring all farmers have access to these schemes. There's much more to be done for livestock farmers. There's also more to be done to ensure that farmers receive a fairer deal at the supermarket. So that means longer term contracts, so farmers have more certainty. It also means improving situation for farmers in the planning system. So we had a great announcement last week by the Prime Minister, who backs our plan to ensure that farmers can get on and build farm shops and sell more of their own produce. So that should help too. And
we've got some pictures on screen. That's the French doing their damnedest to stop motorways. They closed 7 arterial routes into Paris recently in process of the punitive measures put forward by Ursula von der Leyen from the European Union. But you say it's a Scottish thing, but these protests yesterday were in Canterbury. We've seen them in Dover. We're also seeing movements in Cumbria. And there we see those protests in Wales. Would it take a French-style revolution? Would it take major disruption before the government wakes up? It feels like we're playing Queensberry rules at the moment in Britain.
Well, there is a real incentive for the government to change the course they're on at the moment. We saw a poll last week showing support sliding away in historically strong areas for the Conservative Party. So we know the numbers are there. There is a real danger of the party losing support in these areas. Farmers, although they make up a small percentage of the population, they have a huge footprint on their local communities, producing that high quality food, producing goods, shaping our landscape physically. So it's really important the government do wake up, they do listen. That means making sure that the post-Brexit support schemes pay out more, means that supermarkets give farmers a fairer deal. We also loosen up our planning systems so that farmers can get on, sell more of their own produce and build important pieces of farm infrastructure too.
But how long will that take? The clock is ticking. We've got a general election coming. There's a piece in the Telegraph today saying the Conservative voting rural bloc, the farmers are thinking twice. They're not getting much bang for their buck. There's going to be huge pressure from the Liberal Democrats in those seats. We saw that in a lot of by-elections. The clock is ticking for the Tories.
I agree. There is a real need for the party to do something to turn things around in these rural areas. But let's look at what's happened in Labour-run Wales, for example. Here we've seen, again, top-down targets being imposed on farmers. We've seen, 3,000 farmers last week outside the Senate protesting what's going on there. Thankfully, we haven't seen that yet in England, but it is a wake-up call for the Conservative government here to do more to support them.
Although one benefit of that, Jordan, is that the Welsh broke out into a magnificent choral display. The French say it with fire, the Welsh say it via a choir. Jordan Lee, thank you very much, the Nature Programme Manager at the Conservative Environment Network, for your time.